this is how you apply glaze via the brush technique. So first thing is I've got the piece that I want to be glazing, and of course I'm going to make sure that none gets on the bottom. And I've got my glaze selected. I've been careful to shake it properly, and now it's time to apply the glaze. So I'll open it up. First is the correct choice of brush. This brush size is going to be great for this. It's big enough that I'll be able to get nice even coats, but not so big that it's going to be hard to control and be accurate. And something like this brush would be too small. This is going to take longer to get all of the glaze on the surface, and it's going to be much more likely to show brush marks or uneven coats, which can be very streaky once it comes out of the kiln. So to apply the glaze, you just dip your brush in like you're painting, and it looks like this. You don't necessarily want to work like recklessly fast, but you don't need to be super particular about this. I'm just coating the surface with the glaze. We need to do 3 coats. So I'm just getting my first layer on right now. And you can see as I'm doing it, it does dry fairly quick as I'm going. You'll be able to see the area I've already done is already looking kind of dry. All right, so that's the first coat. You can kind of see how that looks. I'm just going to let it fully dry before I move on to my second coat, and I won't need to wait very long. If you accidentally ever get glaze on the bottom of your piece, so let's get a little glaze on the bottom. I got a little bit of glaze on the bottom. All you need is a slightly damp sponge. You can wipe it right away. You really want to make sure that you don't get any too close to the edge either. If there is any, it's always a good idea to use a slightly damp sponge to clean it up at the very end when you're done, so that it'll look nice and clean. So there is the first coat, and now we're basically ready to do our second coat. So we come in, and again, just applying it. I'm not trying to stretch the glaze like you might with paint sometimes, where you really should be going back for more. That's what you want to do with glaze. Feel free to be liberal with the glaze that you are applying. If it came down to, is it better to have 2 coats of glaze or 4 coats? The answer is 4 coats. So 3 is what we're going for, but it's better to have too much than too little. It will look better. So there you go. I just did another coat, 2 coats done on here. Again, I'm just got to let it dry a little bit. We might have to wait a minute or two. What I like to do when I have multiple things to glaze, I kind of will do a coat on this, set it down, grab my next piece, and be glazing that. When I finish the coat on this, then I can come back to this, and it's ready to be continually glazed. So let's wait for this to dry, and we'll come back for coat number 3. All right, and now for our final coat. I could see through the glaze in spots down to the clay when I was working on that first coat. It was still kind of thin in areas. Once I did the second, it became much more opaque, where you can't really see through it anymore. And then now when you do your third coat, you really want to make sure that it just appears very thorough. There's no areas where it's thin, because any of those areas that maybe you just missed in terms of getting 3 coats on there, maybe it only got 1, maybe it only got 2, just in a small area, you might have overlooked it. That will show up when it comes out of the kiln, and that is certainly not what we want. Defects in the glazed surface are generally pretty obvious, and it can ruin a piece. So you want to be aware of that. So now that I've finished that, give it a look over at the bottom, clean it up if there's anything that needs to be cleaned up. And you'll notice I haven't done anything on the inside yet. I can move on to the inside now. To do that, what I like to do is if you just pour a little bit, now I can use my brush and I've got that little bit inside there. I can move that around, and to do the first coat that way, very easy, as long as I only poured a little bit in there. Too much could be an issue, so you don't want to do that. Make sure you get it around that lip. And I'll proceed forward and do the second coat and the third coat. And to do this, I could also, once it's dry, I could pour a little bit in again, or I could just use the brush to do that. So I'll pause this again. I'll do the other two coats, and we'll come back to see what it looks like when it's finished. Okay, so all the coats are now applied to my pinch pot here. And areas that you want to kind of be aware of that typically don't get enough, right on the inside of this lip, right there. Sometimes people miss those spots, and they tend to be a little bit bare, especially with bulbous pinch pots. Make sure that you really get in there and get the glaze applied everywhere. Again, any area that you miss with glaze, or you don't apply the 3 even coats, it will show up as a very obvious flaw when it is finished. So that's how you do the brushing technique. This step is to show you how to apply glaze via the pouring method. So the first most common method is the brushing method. Remember, I brushed the glaze on this guy. And then the next one is going to be pouring. So for pouring, again, I've got my glaze. It's properly mixed up. I'm going to be pouring on the inside of this. I'm going to brush the outside. It just makes sense. But for the inside, if I can get it done in a quicker way that's going to be more thorough, that's what I should do. So what I'm going to do here is, the basic idea is to pour enough glaze on the inside that I know it will cover everything. So it takes a little bit of guesswork. If you mess this up and you don't pour enough in, then you kind of have to go back with a brush and hit the spots that you missed. There's a little bit of debris in here, so I'm cleaning out that debris. All right, so time to pour. So I'm going to go ahead and just pour the glaze in. And then what I do is I'm swirling that glaze around so that it covers everything, and making sure I am careful not to spill it everywhere, but also trying to make sure that it gets applied to every part of the inside of this by just rotating it like you see here. Once everything has been covered with glaze, then it's time to get rid of this excess. So I'm just going to pour it right back into the container. And hold it until it has stopped dripping, and that's an important step right there. If you turn it back over too soon, what will happen is that excess glaze is just going to pool at the bottom, and then now we have a situation where there is too much glaze at the bottom, which can cause all kinds of issues. So it's just dripping away, and you got to keep it here until it's done dripping. So to spare you, I'll pause it, and we'll come back once it's done dripping. Okay, so done dripping. It was really only about another 30 seconds. I had to hold it, and so you can see the inside now is fully coated, which is exactly what we want. And the key point here is that's it, done. Do not pour again. Pouring applies the glaze, pretty thoroughly and pretty, thicker than if you were just using a brush. And I find that one time you pour is generally all you need. And so that's how you do the pouring technique. Now, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to pour the outside of this, which is why I'm going to be using the brush. So pouring technique works great for bigger pots where you have a lot to get on the inside, or like a bulbous pinch pot where it's just hard to get inside with a paintbrush in an accurate way. So that's when the pouring technique can be the appropriate thing to use. All right, this is the step of applying glaze in which you are dipping it into a bucket of glaze. So I've got my bucket of glaze here, all mixed up and ready to go. I have my dipping tongs right here. I have the piece, and we never want glaze to get on the bottom, so I've applied wax resist so that the glaze will not adhere to the bottom. And when I dip this in to the bucket, I'm going to do so that it is completely submerged. I'm going to lower it just like this, basically. As soon as it goes all the way into the glaze, I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to hold it like this so all of the glaze runs out of this and is done dripping, and then it should be good. So to do that, we use these dipping tongs. So when you grab the piece, get comfortable holding it, carefully. And you can see the way that the points on this work, it minimizes the surface contact quite a bit. So I've got a good grip on this thing. I'm going to lower it in now to the glaze. Pull it straight out. Let it stop dripping, and you can see on the bottom, it will bead right off of the wax part, which is pretty cool looking. That's what wax resist does. It resists glaze magically. You can see it's still dripping. We got to let this finish dripping first. Don't get impatient. If you turn this over and it still has excess glaze that needs to drip off of this, it's going to pool in the bottom, which will cause all kinds of issues. When glaze is applied too thick, a variety of glazing errors can ensue and other problems. So we want to make sure that we don't rush it. It's still dripping just a little bit, almost done, and it's good. So now I'll just carefully turn it upside down or the right way, put it down, and I remove the glaze tongs. Now, when you remove these glaze tongs, you may accidentally scratch the surface and it pulls a little of the glaze away from where these were attached. If that happens, just use a brush, dip it in the glaze, and just dab it on the surface that might have gotten slightly scratched when you were removing these, and it will take care of that issue. And so that's how you apply glaze via the dipping method.